All right, hello everybody. Today we're going to be reviewing adding and subtracting decimals. Let's get started. Before we actually get to the math part, I did want to go back and talk a little bit about why it's so important that we line up our decimals when we're adding and subtracting. You've heard us say it over and over again, line up your decimals, line up your place values, but why do we have to line them up? I want to make sure we cover that as well. So we're going to think about candy for just a second. I know this is going to be hard. So I want you to think about candy. Let's say, for instance, I gave you 3 Smarties, 2 Skittles, and 10 Tootsie Rolls, and you laid those out in that order on your desk. Okay? Then I give your neighbor 4 Skittles, 2 Tootsie Rolls, and 6 Smarties, and you line those up on the desk right in the same order that I gave them to you. And then I ask you to add those groups together the way that they're lined up. Can you get an answer? Well, you can. I mean, 3 Smarties plus 4 Skittles is going to give you 7, but what's your label? You can't tell me that that's how many Smarties you're going to have because you added 4 Skittles, and you can't tell me that's how many Skittles you have because you added Smarties, so you have 7 pieces of candy, but you can't really answer the question about how many Smarties you have or Skittles if they're lined up in this order. You have to add like to like. It's the same with the Skittles and the Tootsie Rolls. If you have 2 Skittles and you add 2 Tootsie Rolls, how many total Skittles do you have? Well, you still have 2, but you added 2. It's just impossible, right? You have to add like to like. You can't say that you have 4 Skittles because you don't. You have 2 Skittles and 2 Tootsie Rolls. It's an impossible math problem to do. You do have 4 pieces of candy, but if I'm asking you about your total number of Skittles, you need to line up and do the math problem a little bit differently. Watch. So let's say I gave you the same candy, 3 Smarties, 2 Skittles, and 10 Tootsie Rolls. And then I give your neighbor the same candy, but you guys line them up so like is with like. You put the Smarties with the Smarties, the Skittles with the Skittles, and the Tootsie Rolls with the Tootsie Rolls. Then I ask you to add. Can you get the answer? Absolutely. You can get that you have 9 Smarties because 3 Smarties plus 6 Smarties equals 9 Smarties. 2 Skittles plus 4 Skittles equals 6 Skittles. You're adding the same thing together so you have an easy label on the end of it all. 10 Tootsie Rolls plus 2 Tootsie Rolls is 12 Tootsie Rolls. All right, so when we're thinking about our decimals and our place value, it's kind of the same with whole numbers and decimals. You have to add the whole numbers together and you have to add the decimals together. The decimal point makes it really easy to line those up. So long as you always line up the decimal point, your whole numbers will naturally fall on the left side of the decimal, and your decimals numbers will fall on the right side of your decimal, and everything will be lined up perfectly. And just in case, you know we have a trick to help you. You can always think to yourself, I do know what I've been told. Adding and subtracting decimals has a rule. I follow that rule every time. I keep my decimals and place values in line. Sound off. 1, 2. Sound off. 3, 4. Bring it on home now. 1, 2, 3, 4. So if you say that in your head and you say it with me every time we say it during class, you're going to remember that you do know what you've been told. Adding and subtracting decimals has a rule. You follow that rule every time and you keep your decimals and place values in line. So let's give it a try. Let's practice. First of all, you can never, ever, 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 ever solve an addition or subtraction problem with decimals horizontally. You're going to have to rewrite it on scratch paper. So I'm going to rewrite my problem here, and I do know what I've been told. Adding and subtracting decimals has a rule. I follow that rule every time. I keep my decimals and my place value in line. So look, do you see how my decimals are lined up exactly right? It's going to help me keep everything in order. And remember, you can use a trick when you're adding and subtracting decimals and fill in those empty spots with zeros if you need to. Then it's just plain old addition. 7 plus 4 is 11, carry my 1. 8 plus 5 is 13, plus 1 more is 14, carry my 1. 1 plus 1 is 2, and I keep that decimal right in line for 2 and 41/100ths as my sum. Let's try one that's a bit different. Here's a subtraction problem. And I've got 32 and 5/10 minus 14, and I'm going to keep that decimal in place, and I'm going to subtract. Okay, so take a look at this problem. As you can see, there's an empty space above the 6. We can't ignore that empty space. We know that in a decimal number, there are zeros after the last digit in the number, and they can go on for infinity, so we can add that 0 without changing the meaning of the number. That number is 32 and 5/10. Well, now it's 32 and 50/100, which is the same. It's equivalent to 5/10. So that 0 doesn't hurt anything, and it is necessary for us to be able to subtract the right way. If we had left that 0 off, I can't take 6 away from nothing. But if I put a 0 here, well, then all of a sudden, 6 from 0, I know I have to borrow, and I can go ahead and solve this problem. So I'm going to go ahead and borrow, turn that 0 into a 10. 10 minus 6 is 4. 4 minus 8 I cannot do. I'm going to go right next door and borrow just like I normally would. Turn that into a 14. 14 minus 8 is 6. Keep my decimal right in line. 1 minus 4 I can't do. Go right next door to borrow just like I always do. Turn that into an 11. 11 minus 4 is 7. And 2 minus 1 is 1. My difference, because I'm subtracting, is 17 and 64/100. All right, here's another subtraction problem. And remember, I cannot do it horizontally, so I need to rewrite it vertically. 152 minus, oh, this is hard. How do I line up my decimals? I remember whole numbers always have a decimal at the end. So I can line up my decimal like this. And what do I do to those empty spaces? Well, I turn them into zeros because nothing is the same as 0. And then I can go ahead and I can solve. 0 minus 2, I cannot do it. I need to go right next door and borrow 1. Turn that 0 into a 10. 10 minus 2 is 8. I keep my decimals lined up. 1 minus 1 is not 1. Good job. Is 0. 5 minus 8 I can't do. I go right next door and borrow. Turn that 5 into a 15. 8 from 15 is 7. And 0 minus 0 is nothing. So my answer is 70 and 8/10. All right, and last, one more addition problem. I'm going to rewrite this. 325 and 87/100 plus 248 thousandths. Look at that. That looks like a weird problem, but you know what? I know I'm right because I do know what I've been told. Adding, subtracting decimals has a rule. I follow that rule every time, and I keep my decimals in place value in line. Now I need to go ahead and fill in those empty spots with zeros. Is it going to hurt anything in addition if I leave them blank? Absolutely not, but I want to get in the habit. 8 plus 0 is 8. 7 plus 4 is 11. 8 plus 2 is 10 plus 1 more is 11. Keep my decimal right in line. 5 plus 1 is 6. 2 and 3. So my sum is 326 and 118 thousandths. So our takeaways from today are making sure that when we add and subtract decimals that we're adding and subtracting like to like. So we need to add and subtract our whole numbers, and we need to add and subtract our decimal numbers separately. So we need to make sure that we start by lining up the decimals. If you have your decimals lined up, all of the rest of the place values will naturally fall into place. Make sure you're not changing the numbers to make them fit. Copy them exactly as they are in the problem. Just make sure that your decimals are lined up. Another thing we need to remember is that we put zeros in empty places. It doesn't change the value of the number at all, but it is essential for when, especially when we're subtracting, so that you can regroup if needed. I hope this helps, and I will see you guys next time.